Amen. All right. Well, returning to our plane of existence study, it's great to have you guys back with us. We are going to start a new part of that now, a new series segment, if you will. And I've got this graphic up here because I was thinking about the mother of invention. The title of tonight's message is the mother of invention. Going under this part 3A, and what I'm going to call a time frame of scientific quote unquote discovery, things that have been projected as scientific fact. But as we go back and look at them, we see the duplicity involved and the lies and the deceptions involved with those things. And so I was thinking about just the inventions that men have come up with. Certainly, man has come up with some pretty cool things. We have internet, we have computers, we have airplanes, we have a lot of really complex machinery that man has come up with. But as you see with this picture, man has come up with some boneheaded ideas as well, and so man definitely has that capacity to come up with things that seem to be scientific and seem to go along the lines of discovery and science and those kind of things, but really end up being ridiculous, and they're tossed aside. But of course, I want to use that as a metaphor to talk about the scientific theories that really just don't hold any weight, but we still follow them. We still follow them anyway because they've been so well established over a period of time, over this period of time that I'm going to call the age of duplicity. And so looking at that again here tonight, we're going to jump right into our study. As we've talked about these three segments in this apologetics study, we're looking at the what, the why, the when, the who, the where, the how, and then we're going to take a really deep look at the biblical cosmology. What does the Bible say about where we are at, what kind of plane of existence we're on, and that kind of thing. We'll get to that eventually. Again, we're kind of at the end of this A segment now, talking about the when, and that is really a timeline of sorts. We've looked at what this deception is about. And I've used this Plato's allegory of the cave quite a few times to just paint a picture of this deception. Really, Plato's allegory of the cave is just an allegory about presenting a certain reality to people who don't have access to any other reality. And they're really forced to accept the reality that's being presented to them. But then the guy gets up and he goes back behind that wall and he realizes he's being deceived by somebody who is shining or reflecting onto that wall using a flame, a false image, and a false reality at that. And so it's a great way of looking at it. I hope you guys like it. I'm working on doing kind of a animated type story to kind of make a summary of all the lessons we've gone through and make it palatable for a YouTube video, make it like an hour long or something. And so the part one was the what is the anatomy of this deceit. And again, we looked at the idea of have we only been lied to about evolution, or have we only been lied to about the Big Bang, or does it go further back than that? To create this massive deception? Does it go back to our foundational understanding of what the Earth looks like? Is the Earth flat? Is it round? Is it spinning? Is it spinning around the sun? Or is the sun spinning around it? What is the deception? And of course, we realize at the end of that part one that the deception is that God is dead. Ultimately, all those things are projecting an image onto the wall that says there is no need for God. We've been able to explain away God by all of these scientific, pseudoscientific theories that have been come up with. And so we asked the question, why, in part two, is the truth being suppressed? And if it is, why is it being suppressed? Do we know anything about truth being suppressed now in the last week? Isn't it amazing? We talk about this stuff and we're watching it on the nightly news, where one news outlet is saying, yes, our votes are being counted and there's no deception and there's no fraud and everything's good and Joe Biden's the president. And then the rest of us are going, what about all these people saying there's ballots being thrown in the garbage can and computer systems that are fraudulently changing people's votes from Trump over to Biden, all this other stuff going on, actively being worked out. It's part of this esoteric governance thing that we looked at in the why portion, the truth being suppressed. And so as we looked at that, we looked at also, well, if it's being suppressed, who is doing the suppressing of that truth? And then if that person is doing that suppression, what is motivating them to do that? What kind of source of illumination is propelling them to create this massive deception, to lie to the whole world and then suppress the truth? And so that's kind of where we are. A little bit of a recap. I was told there was going to be some new people here, so I wanted to do a recap and just get them up to speed, but you guys are all old salts. It's good to go over that kind of stuff. You're right. This is kind of part of the new animation portion of it. And so what we're going to look at in this next section in talking about this timeline and talking about the when of all this stuff, when did it happen? Okay, if this is true, people are really suppressing the truth and there is this great deception. When did this happen? Well, it's very hard to put your finger on that when, because it's been going on for such a long, long time, over 2,000 years of these theories and deceptions gradually building into what it is now. And so it's been many people projecting what the earth looks like and in opposition to what the Bible says it is and what we've held it to be. We've also seen the introduction of the solar system model, the the heliocentric model of the universe, where our planet, our Earth, is just another of the many planets, spherical objects that are circling around a sun in the middle, and all those kind of things. And we've looked at that, and the moon is circling around us, and those kind of things. And then we also talked about, this introduction of evolution. All these things have built upon each other. All these things could not exist apart from each other, and they really have built upon each other to project an image onto that wall. To this poor sap that is sitting there strapped in, he gets that message that the need for God is no longer needed. All these things have replaced the need for God. And it really is kind of a programming, right? You see the matrix thing going on there. It is kind of a programming type thing, Oh, okay. All right. Well, if the earth is round and we're just another planet and God didn't create us, but we evolved. Oh, okay. Well, it's programmed into you. From the time you're a little kid, you're programmed to believe that is the reality. That is the reality. And so what we're going to do in this section, the when, is go back and kind of deconstruct those eras of time that produced each one of these pseudoscientific theories that produce this ultimate reality, fake reality that God is dead. And so that's what I hope to do. It's a lot, trying to go back and look at 2,500 years of discovery, and how does that fit? How does that fit into what we believe and what the Bible says, and who said it back then, and when did this guy say it, and when was this discovered? I mean, that's a lot of stuff to try to digest. I don't know if you've tried to do it. You went through NASA, just tried to look at about 70, 80, 90 years of a timeline of NASA coming into existence and the moon landings and all those kind of things. Think about 2,500 years of just kind of pulling all this information together. It's a lot of stuff to get into. But again, I think that one of the things that holds true throughout these things is the mother of invention. Necessity, Plato said, was the mother of invention. If you have a need for something, you'll figure out a way to invent something to be able to accomplish or take care of that need, is the idea. And I think that's true to a large degree, but what we're looking at with these theories is, and this idea of duplicity, they're saying, well, this is scientific fact. We discovered this. We scientifically worked this out. It's absolute truth. You got to believe it. On one hand, to the public, but on the other hand, you really start taking a closer look at it. It's really not science. It's their interpretation of science based on a presupposition of a philosophical or religious view that they want to hold. And so this whole idea of duplicity, it's crazy. And so the need to invent something to back up that theory. Well, that theory has a bunch of holes in it. It really wasn't scientific. And so now we need to come up with another theory to support that theory. And then that one's not totally scientific either. And so on and on and on it goes for 2,500 years. And I think you're going to see that the beginning of that tonight, with the very beginning of the round earth or spherical earth theory, if you will. The guy who came up with the theory in the first place and kind of established, or the guy who is accredited for establishing it anyway. It all began with this kind of idea of not basing it on science purely, but and really not having the ability to base it on science. And that's a big part of what we're going to look at tonight, is their perception of what scientific fact is, rather than what the real truth was. And so we'll look at that tonight. And I think it's going to be an interesting thing for us to take a look at. So the when. I've done many apologetics types of not entire series, but definitely lessons about the idea of apologetics, and that is the idea of defending our faith, right? If we want to defend our faith, if we want to say, hey, you're wrong, God isn't dead, God is alive, God is real, the need for God is still there, the need for the concept of God is still there, and here, let me tell you why, and give you some defense for that. There are certain parameters that you need to come up with. And what I came up with based on, great apologetics teachers all throughout the ages, they all kind of come up with some of these basic ideas. The whole idea of us existing at all. How did we get here? How did the earth and the universe even get here in the first place? What is the cause of the cosmos? There has to be a cause for an effect, right, is the whole idea. And that is something that has to be a part of an apologetic study. The origins, the life itself. How did life itself get here? Not only how did the earth that supports life get here and the universe that supports life, but the life itself. How did it arrive here? Was it created by God? Did it evolve? And that is the big question that we look at over and over again. You also have to talk about destiny, death or resurrection in a Christian context. What's going to happen when you die? Are you just going to go into the nothingness, or are you going to be resurrected? Those kind of ideas. If Christianity is the true fulfillment and proof of those things, that we were created and all those kind of things, and Christianity supports all that, then there needs to be some historical proof that Christianity is authentic and it's real, and the people who claim to be Christians really have had a life-changing experience, as the Bible says you would if you had a life-changing experience through Christianity. All those kind of things have to be a part of that apologetic study. And then you get kind of into the philosophic, hey, why are we here in the first place? What's the meaning of life? Why are we even here? That kind of idea. We ask those questions. What's right and what's wrong? And what's the basis for our morality? All those kind of things. That's what Christianity has focused on when it comes to defending our faith. We've tried to defend our faith based on that stuff right there. And usually it kind of centers around this idea of origins. And so we spend a lot of time battling out with the evolutionists, creation, intelligent design, battling it out on those terms alone. But what are we missing? What are we missing? We're missing the fact that they're not talking about this other stuff, the history of Christianity, the meaning of life, the morality, death and resurrection. The evolutionists don't care about that stuff. They just keep pumping that reality out there. Evolution is true. The Big Bang is true. The earth is a globe spinning around the sun. And that's all they talk about. And as a result, that completely undermines the message that we're trying to get out there. When we're just fighting for intelligent design and don't realize that the evolutionary theory is balancing on this very shaky ground of pseudoscientific theories and nonsense that they came up with hundreds and even thousands of years ago, and we don't even touch that foundation. They're shooting at our foundation at all the time. I remember there was an old graphic that would show the evolutionists are shooting at the foundation of God's word. They're in one castle, we're in the other castle, and we're shooting at tertiary goofy subjects like gay marriage and other things like that. And they're just firing away at our foundation, the Bible, just creaming our foundation. And we're shooting at stuff that really would crumble on its own if we would fire at their foundation. And I think that is a great understanding. You know, if we're going to fire at the foundation of evolution, we can't just shoot at evolution, because evolution is sitting on a foundation of 2,500 years of shaky foundation. And we never even mess with it. We never even try to touch it. We never even go there. And again, it comes back to, well, I'm afraid to say that I'm a flat earther, or I'm afraid to put my faith into something that the entire world has said is a lie or is a hoax or anything, along those lines. And so, it's a very precarious situation we're in. But again, if we're going to defend God, if we're going to defend the truth of God and the need for God and the fact that he's real and he's alive, he's not dead, we have to, I think, open up that apologetics toolbox and put some more tools in there, in my opinion. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with this study, is just give us some more tools, to start questioning. When we talk about the size of the earth, the size of the sun, the size of the moon, and how far the moon and the sun are away from us, and all those kind of things, there's a predetermined distance that science has already come up with and said, it's absolute truth. And those distances determine how far the stars are away from us as well. And they hold to those. And it's one of the reasons they can shoot our arguments down the tubes, because they say, well, how can the earth only be 10,000 years old or 6,000 years old when we've got stars that their light is shining to the earth, and we know for certain that those stars are 10 trillion light years away. So there you go. Your argument's bunk. And it's true. Creationists have been going like this for years, trying to figure out, well, the speed of light is this fast and that star is so far away. How can it possibly be? All those kind of things. Are the stars really that far away, though? Is the moon really that far away? Is the sun really that far away? Nobody even asked that question, because of what we're going to talk about tonight. Because of what a bunch of Greek philosophers came up with centuries ago, millennia ago, and all the mathematics and distances have been based on that ever since. It's kind of crazy, isn't it? And nobody is going to challenge that. Nobody's going to challenge how big the circumference of the earth is. It's established. It's proven fact, right? Nobody's going to establish how far the sun is away from the earth. Nobody's going to challenge how far away or how big the sun is in comparison to the earth. Those things have already been established. There's no way we're going to argue those points. But we realize if those are questionable numbers, if those distances, if those circumferences are not as indisputable as they say they are, then it changes the whole ball game, doesn't it? It changes the whole ball game. If those stars are really just local to the earth, not too far away from us, really in relation to how big the earth is, then that changes a whole lot of things. And we're not going to go into that tonight, but just the foundation of those things is what we're going to look at tonight. The foundation of those distances are really set in the philosophies and things that we're going to look at here tonight. And so we're going to look at ancient cosmology a little bit tonight. We're not going to be able to go into as great depth as I wanted to, because again, it's just too huge. But we're going to talk about it specifically in light of the establishment of what is considered to be the foundational principle that the Earth is a globe rather than being flat, and then we'll talk about it in light of that. We'll go back to the Middle Ages a little bit. We'll talk about the early modern era, get into Copernicus again, and then go on into Galileo and Newton and all those guys, talk about them down the road, and then get into the modern scientific era as well, the present. I wanted to remind you of these three questions we asked. I've broke them down a little bit, made them a little bit smaller, paraphrased them a little bit. But again, just to remind you, could mankind be deceived to the point that our collective perception of reality doesn't comport with true reality? Does compelling evidence exist which contradicts the accepted models of our Earth and universe, which deceptively hides the true nature of our existence? Why is it why is that conception of reality so completely antithetical to the Christian biblical narrative, which condemns souls to hell for eternity? And again, I think that's the point. That's the point. These things have been brought into fruition, not because man himself just says, "Oh, I just want to mess with the Christians. I just want to disprove the Bible because I don't like it. And I didn't like going to Sunday school when I was a kid." It's not that. I think, again, as we looked at what is the illumination that is motivating people to do these things, it has to have something to do with demonology and Satan being at the core of it. If the outcome is to be completely antithetical to Christian biblical narrative and condemn souls to hell, how can we not ask the question, could Satan be involved in that? I wonder, gosh, would he do that? No. What's in it for him? Why would Satan do that? I mean, to not even ask the question, right, is pretty ridiculous for Christians. But that's in large part, it's because they just don't even realize that the connection is made with those two things. It's just, well, that's what I was taught as a kid, and I believe it. And what's the big deal? I can make the Bible, conform to that idea somehow. I can compromise my beliefs a little bit so I can agree with science just to get along with everybody and not look like a kook. And really, that's kind of the position Christians are put in. It's either or to a large degree. All right. Well, proof of concept. How can I prove that here tonight? How can I prove some of those things and go back? Well, the early Greek philosophers alluded to a spherical Earth, though with some ambiguity. It wasn't clear. They didn't come right out and say, "Oh, yeah, absolutely, the Earth is round and it's spinning." They were just kind of, again, not scientific, postulating, observing, thinking. And a lot of it was looking through the lenses of their own ideologies. Well, the moon is round and the sun is round and we worship those. The Earth must be round, and it really, in a lot of senses, it comes down to that simple understanding back in the 6th century BC. Imagine, as people were looking at the moon, looking at the sun, not having any idea really what they were. Once they departed from a biblical understanding of those things, all bets are off, right? And by that point, many people had just completely abandoned the Bible, the biblical narrative that was handed down from Moses and those things. And the Pythagorean schools of the mystery religions, all those things, they had rejected the one true God of Israel. They had rejected any kind of biblical revelation at all, and really had started on this path of, let's discover what truth is, right? We love truth. Let's figure it all out. And that's how philosophy got going in the first place. But again, it kind of started without the assistance of God to a large degree. And so you see there that they had this concept that the Earth may have been spherical, but no proof of it. It was just kind of some ideas. Some idea of the sphericity of the Earth seems to have been known to these guys. in the 5th century, accepted in the Pythagorean school in the 5th century BC. And so, as we talked about, Copernicus reached back to these guys and said, well, they were kind of on the right track, and why are we believing in this geocentric universe when those guys were kind of pushing us in a new direction? And he reached back and went with their ideas and then added on to them. And that's how he came up with his heliocentric. And so they were kind of headed in that direction, you might say, in the 6th century, 5th century BC. But they didn't have anything nailed down whatsoever. And so again, Copernicus is the guy that brings it all together in a package that everybody can accept. Everything's round. All these balls are spinning around, circling the sun. We don't know why, but it's happening. And there's our theory, a little bit more advanced than that. A lot of mathematics that went into it, but that's essentially what had happened. He just drew from the work they had done 2,000 years earlier, 1,000 years earlier, 1,500 years earlier in some cases, and came up with his own theory. So a couple of guys here. Aristotle had some great ideas. A lot of them were wrong, but his ideas really dominated science for about 2,000 years. Ptolemy comes along and writes in his Almagest, which was the guiding principles for the cosmology of the ancient Greek world until Copernicus came out with his ideas. Not only was the Bible kind of leaning in that direction, saying that, the earth is at the center and God's attention is here, and the moon and the stars and the sun are just supporting the operations on the earth. That was a basic understanding of the biblical model, that the earth was flat, the earth was at the center. Ptolemy kind of supported that to some degree, that the sun and the other planets were orbiting the earth. And then, of course, that was the guiding principle for cosmology again until Copernicus comes along with his theory and sets into motion the heliocentric model of the universe. Well, sometime before that, we have this guy, Eratosthenes of Cyrene in Egypt. He comes along. He's a great scientific writer, astronomer, a poet. He's into music. He's just one of these very intelligent guys of the ancient Greek world. There's no reason for us to knock these guys and make fun of them or anything like that. But he is the one that is accredited with being the first one to really say the earth is a sphere, in a scientific sense, in a pseudoscientific sense in some cases. And so he's the first one that made a measurement of the size of the earth for which any details are known. And so it's interesting that we've lost, I read something today that said, we've lost the methods by which he measured the earth and the circumference of the earth. I don't know how he did it from right there in Egypt, but he did it. He went and measured it. And that's the measurement we still use, the one he came up with. Now they say they've, gone and verified that all his measurements were very accurate, and it's amazing how accurate he was. And you read stuff like that. Oh, great job, man! I can't believe you did that by just sitting there and figuring it out mathematically from Egypt. But he did. Isn't that great? 240 BC, Eratosthenes calculated Earth's size with a good accuracy, it says. This was a moment of triumph for the human intellect. First, to recognize our planet is a sphere, then to use the powers of observation, deduction, and mathematics to calculate its size. And again, that's the going idea about what he did, is he was able to calculate how big the Earth was mathematically and establish that it was a sphere. Now, somebody else has commented that it's a common misconception that he was measuring the circumference of the round Earth in his shadow experiment. He had simply assumed that the earth was a sphere in his experiment based on the work of Aristotle. And so others had already said the earth is a round sphere. And so he just made an assumption and went with that assumption. And everybody else since then has been going with that assumption as well into the present day, that the earth is round and not flat. Eratosthenes never set out to prove the earth was a globe. That was already accepted, at least among the Greeks, for hundreds of years before his time. He aimed to measure the diameter of the earth. How accurate his results were depends entirely on how his stadia were, and that was a unit of measurement that he was using. And that's, again, the scientific statement about it. But what I wanted to point out tonight in a video is there are a lot of problems with his assumptions, the assumptions that he made. Chief among them is how big the sun is. How could he have known that, right? How far away is the sun from the earth? He would have had to know those things for his experiment to be accurate. But yet today, every year on the anniversary of when he did his experiment, across the world, around the world, over the world, however you want to say it, school kids are indoctrinated with, here's how we know the earth is round. And they do that experiment in honor of what he did. And so is it valid? I guess is a question that we could ask ourselves here tonight. And we want to look at that. Here is a pretty good idea of his experiment. He was in this town of Cyrene, known as Aswan now, and set out to prove the circumference, thinking that the center of the earth, and there's 360 degrees in a circle, and so everything's in a degree, and if the earth is round, then a pole, 500 miles from here, at the same time I'm looking down into this well, my postulation is that the angle of the sun's rays will be different 500 miles away, and those shadows should fall in different angles, is kind of the idea. And it's based on the parallel rays of the sun coming down onto the surface of the earth at the same time. I also find that I am just not smart enough to kind of deal with this kind of stuff. It's too much mathematics for me and geometry. And so I'm going to play a video for you right now that I think does a really good job of establishing the mathematics and the geometry.
It's understandable that, for the most part, most of us will readily accept and believe that we live on a spinning globe. It's been taught to us since we were kids, and it's been taught that it's been proven with scientific measurements for thousands of years. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the very foundation of the globe Earth belief, and we'll see how everything about the heliocentric model is nothing more than interpretations of measurements and observations that have been made throughout history. So let me be clear right from the start that nothing changes when it comes to the distances that we can measure things on the Earth. I'm not talking about maps or alternatives, but the measurements that we can make on this Earth and the observations that we can make of luminaries and celestial objects do not change. What I'm going to try to get across here is that things like equinoxes, lunar eclipses, the angle at which we see the sun, moon and stars in the sky doesn't dictate that we live on a globe. What we have to understand is that if we are going to be scientific and pragmatic, that the measurements and the observations that we can make are all open to interpretation. And the idea that we live on a globe orbiting the sun in a heliocentric solar system is built entirely on assumptions and calculations to create a model that has no basis in reality. But it doesn't mean that the observations or the measurements that we make have to change. It's all about how those measurements are interpreted. So of course, if we've been through school and an education system, we've been introduced to this solar system. And we haven't really been given a choice in alternatives. We've been told from the moment we step into the classroom that this, the solar system, is our reality. And we've been given a handful of scientists, philosophers and astronomers and their observations to tell us that they have given us the scientific proof that we live on a globe. But really all we have is a bunch of compartmentalized explanations and interpretations of the observations and the measurements that we can make. So again, just to be clear, nothing changes. The angles at which we see the sun rise and set anywhere on the earth, or the eclipses that we see from time to time, the predictions that we can make, in no way dictate that we live on a globe, especially when we look up at the sky to make those observations and then attempt to determine that that dictates we live on a spherical spinning earth. And of course we are led to believe that the idea of a flat earth will take us back to the Stone Age. Part of the programming that we get in school, that we are taught to ridicule the idea of a flat earth, that we are told that people used to think that you would sail off the edge if you got to the horizon. And of course we know that's a ridiculous idea, but it's also a ridiculous idea to think that the horizon is a curve that has never been measured. So it's really, these ideas are as ridiculous as each other and have no basis in real physics or real science. So let's go on to Eratosthenes. And this image that we are given of the Eratosthenes experiment, the account we are given is that he calculated the circumference of the earth. Now again, we don't know for sure what Eratosthenes concluded from his findings, from his measurements, and there is no dispute that those measurements can be made with a great degree of accuracy. And even today, on a yearly basis, people go out and they recreate the Eratosthenes experiment. So yes, we can make these measurements, and they are scientific in their own right, in that we make a physical measurement of shadows or angles of those shadows. But we're going to see that again we are looking at how this has been interpreted in favor of the heliocentric spinning globe model, when really these measurements are totally open to interpretation. The first of which is the idea of circumference. Now we know that circumference can mean the circumference of a circle, or it can be the circumference of a sphere. Now when we come to talking about a sphere in space, there are many contradictions here, because we know that a sphere doesn't have an up and down, yet we are given a top and a bottom of the globe Earth, the North and the South Pole. We're also given the Earth's tilt, a sphere that somehow tilts, because it refers to the ecliptic plane of the Earth's alleged orbit around the Sun. Again, these are all based on observations from the Earth, not observations from outside of the Earth, looking at the Earth going around the Sun. None of that. These are all ways of interpreting the observations and measurements that we can make on the Earth. So there's no disputing that these measurements can be made. So let's just go and have a look at okay, so this is the picture that we are given, and we are told and led to assume that the Sun arrives at the globe Earth in parallel rays. And so Eratosthenes waited until the Sun was directly overhead in Cyan, and so he looked down a well in which there was no shadow, or the Sun was shining directly down as well, so the Sun was overhead. So really we could say that here, this red line here represents the center of the Sun. Now, this doesn't dictate the size or the distance of the Sun. And then over here in Alexandria, which was 5,000 stadia away, about 800 kilometers it is estimated, we had a shadow from a stick that worked out to be a 7-degree difference from this vertical or line of sunlight. And this is really totally open to interpretation, but what we have here is actually wrong, a wrong interpretation, a false interpretation of how light behaves, and this curve has been given to the Earth, and the angle attributed to parallel sun rays. Let's go and have a look at what's happened here, what's gone wrong, how has this been misinterpreted. Let's go with the assumption that the Sun is a sphere. So with a spherical Sun, what we actually have is lines. If you want to consider the sunlight or sun rays as lines, they should be coming out from the Sun like this. And of course we are given parallel lines, possibly based on the assumption that the Sun is massive compared to the Earth. But again, that's just an assumption. It's just a necessity of the heliocentric model. We know from our observations that the Sun and the Moon look to be about the same size, and they both appear to be very close. So let's just, if we look at what makes more sense to you, to say that the Sun is making parallel lines of light, or these kinds of lines of light. In which case, on a flat Earth, as we can see here, we would then get different angles of the Sun's rays, creating no shadow here on this vertical one. If we're standing here and the Sun is directly above us, then there will be no shadow. But if the Sun remains here and we are at some distance away from this place, then we do get a sun ray coming to us on a flat Earth like this. This makes much more sense and fits with reality than the idea that we have parallel lines. This doesn't make sense. In fact, this is one of those examples of the globe Earth proponent claiming that the flat earther can't see in 3D when they are given an image in 2D on a screen to represent 3D, like this, which doesn't fit with reality. Yeah? So these lines, these angled lines from the sun make more sense. But this still doesn't dictate to us what's moving. Is the sun moving? Is the earth moving? As we mentioned earlier, in the heliocentric model, of course, the earth has to be moving, has to be going around the sun, has to be spinning, has to be a sphere to fit the model. But the reality of any observation that we can make with light shows us that we can move the surface and make the shadow change if we have a light above us, or we can move the light. We can make the surface flat, or we can make it curved like this. So really, what fits? Now, with the interpretation of Eratosthenes' experiment, this is what we are given. We are given these parallel lines of light and a curved surface. But really, we can consider it this way, or we can consider it this way. You see, it is all open to interpretation. And as we've seen, we've got Eratosthenes touted as the founder, or the person who not measured, calculated the circumference of the earth. But what did he really calculate? Did he perhaps calculate the circumference of the circle that the sun makes above a flat earth to dictate the circumference of the equator? And does the circumference of a circle of a sun dictate the size of the earth? Not at all. Not at all. It is simply an observation of a light in the sky that is doing circles above a flat earth, a motionless earth that could be infinite. And this is why I don't propose any model, don't propose any alternative, because we cannot know. But what we can know is that the historical accounts we are given of the so-called discoveries are not discoveries. The only thing that's been discovered is a way to interpret the measurements that can be made, or the observations that can be made. That goes for all of these people: Galileo, Newton, Einstein, Eratosthenes, Nicholas Copernicus, and whoever else you want to mention. Because they've made observations of intangible objects in the sky, created two-dimensional models to represent 3 or 4 dimensions, and ignoring or translating perspective, which governs all observations that we make, into an imaginary curve. So this picture that you see here is a much more realistic illustration of reality than this. But does that give us any idea of the distance or the size of the sun? Not really. If we took this image and we changed this line up here to a 7 degrees angle to meet this line, remember this line would represent the actual center of the sun, and this line could then be angled at 7 degrees to eventually meet the sun. We could then create a new model with a local sun over a flat Earth based on that. And nothing would change. Nothing would change about the angles or the distances between those 2 points, or the length of the shadow. So anyone who proposes that repeating these experiments and observations and measurements is somehow some kind of proof that we live on a globe is not being scientific, and they are not offering up any proof. All they are doing is coming to a conclusion based on a presupposition that has no way of being confirmed as proving that we live on a spinning globe going around a sun in a heliocentric system. All they can ever do is prove the model. The model is just one of many possible interpretations of our reality. There's no need for the Earth to be moving. The only reason we are told that it's moving and we have a big bang that created everything to be spinning and come together with gravity, etc., is just ideas and theories to try to gel together this heliocentric model. There has never ever been any proof that we live on a globe. And when we take measurements of our immediate surroundings and we look at real world physics, we come to the realization that it's impossible that we are on a globe.